the game is what the rules are, not what the players have sort of decided it is.
Distraction makers.
Something that we hear often, especially when we are discussing Commander a lot, is that Commander is more random. It has more variance, therefore is more casual than 60-card Magic.
Or that it was made to be more casual by adding more variance, by having a larger deck with singleton. Only one card of, every card.
Right. So you have a 99-card deck. You draw 7 cards, just like you do in 60 cards. So theoretically, you're like, oh, yeah, this is definitely more random.
Yeah.
However, you have a Commander.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to start the game always with 1 card in your hand. Yes. So we thought about this for a bit and sort of asked the question, because of that, how likely is it that if you're playing a Commander that has a combo, maybe not game ending, but combos with a card in your deck at some point, how likely is it that you can put that combo together, A plus B combo, versus 60 card? Before we go into discussing more about the variants of Commander, if you like our videos here, please like and subscribe. Also, we have an announcement. Forrest has a Kickstarter coming up. He's going to tell you about it.
I have a Kickstarter coming out, and I'm going to tell you about it for the 5-color playmat series that I've been working on since the start of the year. So,
link in description.
And I think that's a good way of trying to phrase it, because we're looking at things through worst-case scenario. Because if we were to be designing a game, this is how we would have to frame it. We'd have to consider how easy is it in this format versus this format for players to get these 2 cards and piece them together.
Right. So when we look at 60 card, right, you can play up to 4 copies of each individual card. However, you don't start the game with any 1 card in your hand. You have to draw 7 cards and draw into those cards somehow.
Yeah.
So any individual card, this is going to get a little mathy for a second. So as we explain sort of our calculus behind coming up with where these 2 things intersect, right?
Yeah, I doubt there's much crossover between people that watch us and people that like math.
Right. It's probably not many.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a few. They can leave a comment. All right. At any rate, so when we look at 60-card Magic, and we can have 4 copies of a card, and we're trying to get an A plus B combo. 60-card deck, 4 copies of each card, drawing 7 cards. Any 1 individual card, like if you have 4 copies of it, you have about a 40% chance to draw that card. A little less.
Yeah.
If you're trying to draw any 2 cards that you have 4 copies of together in your opening hand, it's about a 14% chance to do that.
We're giving ourselves a little leeway
here. Little wiggle room, just because there's multiple factors here in terms of like, well, if you've drawn one of the cards, is your samples your population size now 59 instead of 60? Whatever. Right. There's a little bit of wiggle room here, but we'll call it about a 14% chance.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Gavin from the editing room here. I just wanted to go over the math that we're using to determine how random Commander actually is. So we can look at this hypergeometric equation here. You don't necessarily need to understand it. I'll explain real quick that capital N equals the number in the population, which means the size of the deck. Lowercase n equals the sample size, so that's how many cards we're drawing. Capital K equals the number of successes within the population, so the number of cards in the deck. And then lowercase k equals the number of successes in the sample. So how many cards of the successes we want to draw in the number of cards we are drawing. So hopefully that clarifies the math on it. And back to the video.
Okay. So then in Commander, you have a 99-card deck. You draw 7 cards. You have about a 7% chance of drawing any 1 individual card in your deck.
Yes.
If you change those numbers in any way, like let's say you're drawing a lot more cards, or you're playing redundancy, which means you have a card and you have another card that does the equivalent thing but has a different name, so that you can play it by the Commander rules, you can very easily reach a 15% chance to draw any 1 individual card.
Right.
And then if your Commander is the other half of that AB combo, it becomes the equivalent.
Right.
So this is kind of, one of the things that we talk about sometimes about tutor spells is that tutor spells sort of at surface value here undermine a lot of what Commander's trying to do, because you are effectively doubling whatever card that you need in that particular moment and you're inching ever closer to the same kind of consistency as 60 card Magic.
Right. To better frame this, though, what is a popular AB combo with a commander in Commander Magic? I think Godo?
Godo's one of them. The one that's more popular now is Tivit. So it's
Okay.
Tivit and Time Sieve makes it so that you can just take infinite turns. Tivit and Time Sieve are sort of one of the quintessential combos of CEDH. Tivit is a 6-mana 6/6 flyer that when it comes into play or when it does damage to a player, you get to effectively make I think 5 artifacts because you get to vote twice.
You get to vote an additional
So yeah, you'd get 5 either treasures or clues. Doesn't really matter because Time Sieve says sacrifice 5 artifacts, take an extra turn.
Right.
So effectively, you can take infinite turns. You can attack with Tivit to can do enough damage to kill every player at the table.
Right.
In that situation, if you've built your deck to draw twice as many cards as what you normally would, so you draw 15 cards, you are effectively at the same odds of assembling an A plus B combo in a 60 card Magic deck.
Right. I think, but what we're more likely to see instead of obviously, yes, you get into like what the value engine's going to be if it's card draw or if it's something like a tutor. But I think what's probably more common, were to assume, would be to have redundancy, like you're saying. Where
Sure, or any of the above. And in fact, you can ever increase this more with each subsequent redundancy that you put in your deck.
Right.
So I guess if you're trying to stay more in the casual end of things here, you probably should be trying to run as like almost no redundancy and less card draw. But unfortunately, as we've seen with the sort of structures of Commander, card draw is and mana acceleration are basically all that you want to do.
Right.
You're sort of in this more solitaire, a little less interactive environment.
If you want to see more, we have a video on this called about the bystander effect, where we talk about guns versus butter.
Right. Yeah. So. Basically, it comes from an economic idea that a society can create either guns or butter, and where you're putting your resources has different kinds of compounding effects.
Right.
Where if we look at that in the case of Commander, if you are investing your resources in attacking your opponents rather than investing in your own resources, you are inherently at a disadvantage to players who are able to just invest in their own resources.
Right. So everyone's making butter.
Everybody
all
be
the
making
time.
butter. Yeah.
And while people are making butter, and that's what they want to do in their Commander game, someone has an AB combo, and they always have A at their disposal, ready to go.
Yep. And so when we start to think about, like, I think what's funny too is like you get a lot of people who are saying that CEDH is a separate format. It's not. It shouldn't be considered the same as casual Commander.
You are one accidental card inclusion into stepping into CEDH territory.
Well, and part of this is, I mean, we could see the argument here of saying like, well, just don't put infinite combos in your deck, and that's not it's not really what we're saying at this point, right? It's like, okay, A plus B might not be an infinite combo. It might just be something that is so economically overwhelming that you're going to win the game, right?
That's kind of the time sieve situation that you're kind of bringing up, that like it's not a guarantee that you're going to win this way, but you're more than likely going to win.
Oh, and not even time sieve. So I'll use my Sidisi deck as an example, right?
Sure.
So Sidisi is part of my A plus B combo. My other part of the combo is either Snarling Gorehound, which is whenever a creature with power 2 or less comes into play, I get to surveil, or it's Path of Discovery, which does essentially the same thing. Instead of surveilling, it lets you discover.
Okay.
Discover? I don't know. Let you do something.
Yeah.
And then that effectively doesn't give me an infinite I win the game combo, but it gives me a combo that essentially says you're going to produce enough value here that you're going to overwhelm the table.
Right.
And so when I look at like how often I get to do that, there's even other factors in that deck that increase the likelihood of being able to do that. As I'm dredging things, I get Snarling Gorehound into my graveyard, and then I have a way to bring it back into play. I'm starting to approach a 60-card Magic deck that has an A plus B combo.
Potentially.
Right? Maybe even surpassing.
I was going to say, based off of the math that we have here, it's potentially surpassing that, because as long as you have Sidisi available, we've found that all you need is 2 redundant cards. Redundant cards, I think, might be a weird term for some players if they're not familiar with it, but yeah, it's just 2 cards that do pretty much the same thing.
Equivalent.
And you might have more than just those two potentially in any given deck. And on top of that, you also have other ways of gaining value, like you're saying, other ways of accessing cards at a faster rate than what the average rate is of once per turn. Whereas in 60 card format, where things are a lot slower and you have a lot more of these like precise tuned decks, at that point we're reaching percentage rates that are higher than what's common and standard. And it's not that standard can't also have cards that have some form of redundancy that are in a similar vein. I mean, red aggro, how many different cards can say deal damage? Like it's always some combination of that.
Right. And when we're looking at, so part of this conversation also should discuss the difference between like a quality card and a quantity card, where when we're looking at things like Red Deck Wins, it's a deck that's playing a lot of quantity of the same card, right? So you need to get a certain percentage of cards that deal roughly 3 damage. And so these decks tend to not be as good at mulligans, right?
Yeah.
When you look at what quality cards do, these are cards like Bitter Blossom that if you have just that card in your hand, you're much more likely to be able to win the game off of that card. So you're more likely to want to mulligan a lot to get that specific card.
Right.
So then when we look at Commander, well, now we have a quality card in the command zone.
Right. At your disposal at all times.
Always there.
Imagine whatever that card is that you want in your deck and just place it next to your deck. Now, that's not every Commander deck, obviously. Sometimes it's not so much the card that you want, but it's the card that's going to go with the card that you want. But the fact is that as long as you have one thing, you have access to that other thing at all times.
So there's actually even something that I just realized that we hadn't accounted for.
Okay.
And that's mulligans.
Oh, right. Mulligans makes it even... Well, but there's mulligans in standard. Like
They don't work the same.
Oh, you get a free mulligan.
You get a free mulligan
That's
in
true.
Commander.
That is true. You do get a free mulligan. And you get to draw an extra time on your first turn.
If you go first, yeah. And
so...
Dude, what? Okay, look.
Well, okay, wait. Before you rant, why is this a problem?
Why is this a problem?
And is it a problem, or is this a feature?
I mean, look, it depends on what your goals are, but if your goals are to create a format with more variance, commanders don't really make any sense.
Right.
You can build your deck in a way that doesn't take advantage of this, but if you're doing that, you are making that choice. The system is not incentivizing that.
Right.
And that's often the thing that we come around to and saying that, like, look, the game is what the rules are, not what the players have sort of decided it is. Although in your own pods, maybe you decide that's what it is.
It's sort of like you can decide to play a game of Settlers of Catan and decide that no one gets to trade. But that's not what the game is incentivizing and allowing and encouraging players to do. And so in which case you might have a worse, maybe a better experience based off of that, but that's not based around what the game systems are encouraging.
We're also not even taking into account that different people's house rules could be that you get 2 free mulligans or draw 10 and then keep 7 or whatever. Like, so the thing I guess that I would point to here is that getting better at deck building is going to make Commander an even more consistent format than what people seem to think it is. Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm like, okay, well, what is the path forward to for a player that wants to play a lot of Commander? Commander is their format. What do you actually get better at doing? I guess you get better at like, okay, how, like, here's a bunch of different like interactions that I've found, but like, there's only so many of those, right? There's only so many knobs in Magic for that kind of variety. Yeah. Right. At some point, what each of the, like, you know, we get down to kicker and horsemanship at some point, right? Kicker and cycling and horsemanship and a few others, but whatever, right? If we're
every mechanic is like 2 different mechanics.
If we're being, you know, reductive, it's
kicker, cycling,
and cycling. Yeah. I would argue that
horsemanship, I think, counts as all combat tricks.
Yeah. Well, combat creature mechanics. The point of this is that if you are trying to create a game, if you're trying to create a rule set that is incentivizing variance, having a card that is always available outside, having an 8th card effectively in your hand, is subverting that idea.
Yeah, and it's not to say that we're necessarily opposed to that.
It's
right?
fine. It's just you have to understand what's actually going on.
Right. And so a lot of ways, I think that the way you get around this, either you have to have a very carefully designed format where you make sure that there's just the least amount of redundancy possible so that players can't try and create a much more consistent outcome. You accept that your game has a much more consistent outcome, but that goes against maybe the goals of what Commander is meant to be, which is supposed to be a casual format. So ideally, you want to try and create some way, if you want to try and have a similar level of variance, or you want to be encouraging of a casual format or a casual state of the game, then you need to try and account for that and have some way of curbing that potential consistency.
I guess what's tough here too is that like your commander is very good at being sort of the identity of your deck, right? And the deck building part of this is super interesting. But I do wonder if like, okay, well, what if your commander is like, it's not just always available to you. Maybe it's in the deck. Maybe there's some other way to do this that makes it so that this variance isn't just so A plus B is so easy. And also, I mean, okay, so let's get into even a little bit real quick about like why that is such a problem. And it's that, you mentioned earlier that like you're sort of one card away from making, an unfun play state. And the problem too is like, yeah, you are, and you're creating that opportunity. You're creating the opportunity for that to happen way too often, effectively, if you're playing any kind of redundancy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we can also look into like any card game that starts to stretch into competitive levels. We talked about Duelist, for instance. We have a video where we played Duelist, and we talked about how like Duelist was at such a level of consistency that that's something that actually ended up harming the game in the long run.
Yeah.
That was something that sort of shied casual players away because they couldn't feel like they were making progress at low enough rankings of a tournament level for them to make them feel like they wanted to invest more time or energy or money into potentially getting newer cards to build better decks or whatever.